everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics. Today, I'm joined by Nick Kadysh from PharmAla Biotech. How are you doing today, Nick?
Good. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think we linked up at the first ever Wonderland Microdose conference at a small after party, and I was blown away by your business concept. I was like obvious and obviously really important. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about what you guys are up to at PharmAla?
Yeah, no worries. Look, we're a super simple company, which is we basically just do two things. I really believe in like keeping things simple. One thing we do is we manufacture MDMA. So in August of last year, we became the first for-profit company, the first organization other than MAPS to make GMP MDMA, which we sell to clinical researchers. And then the other thing we do is we research and develop novel analogs of MDMA. So we're an early stage drug discovery company. But basically, yeah, like look, we make good MDMA today, and we're going to make better MDMA tomorrow.
Fantastic. Is there a pathway for PharmAla to be providing to clinics outside of a research capacity?
Yeah, 100%. So, as probably most of the listeners of the podcast know, Australia just changed their rules to allow for use of MDMA and psilocybin in a clinical context for authorized prescribers. And it just so happens that we have both GMP MDMA and GMP psilocybin through a partnership with Mindset Pharma in inventory, like ready to ship. So we were actually in Australia like 2 weeks ago, basically like meeting with distributors, looking at onshoring manufacturing. Like I fully expect that we will be doing treatments in Australia on the 1st of July.
That's really incredible. I didn't realize the timeline was so aggressive.
Yeah, it's super aggressive. I mean, that's if everybody can figure out their roles and all this stuff. Like, the TGA has to authorize a bunch of prescribers. The college has to, there's a college of psychiatrists that has a piece of this. We met with all of the various entities, and we realized fairly quickly that this is not like ready. It's not a done deal yet, but it's a work in progress, and I'm actually pretty confident they're going to get it done, and it's going to work really well.
Wow. Okay. Well, I love that optimism, and I hope so as well. I saw some recent press that gave me like a little bit of pause, but I'm also really excited about it. I think the public in Australia is ready for it. I know there's some regulators that don't want it, but there's some that do, and it's just so great to see that this shift happened so quickly.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, so prior to this happening, our major customers for our MDMA, which we call LaNeo, that's our clinical research product. So like our customers were researchers, universities, companies in certain cases, but mostly it was individual clinical researchers who wanted to do human trials with MDMA and couldn't get it from anywhere else. MAPS hasn't sent any MDMA to Australia, as far as I'm aware. Maybe a little bit, but not much. Whereas we were like, we're a vendor to University of Sydney, we're a vendor to University of Melbourne. Like we're there. We're in Australia quite a bit already, and so the TGA guidance comes out, right? We're all like, it's Friday morning in Australia. It's Thursday night in Toronto, where I am. Half my team is on the West Coast. We all see this thing and like our heads explode, right? Like no one saw this coming. Nobody. And so we're flipping out. This is amazing. And then like 2 days later, one of our researchers who's buying our stuff has a front page op-ed on like the Sydney Morning Herald saying, it's too soon. We shouldn't be doing this. This is completely wrong.
That's wild. So
I love it. It's great.
Are you originally from Canada?
Yeah. Well, actually, originally, I'm like not popular to say these days. I was born in Russia. I'm an immigrant. So I'm a Russian. I was born in Moscow, and then I moved here when I was pretty young. I was like 6 years old. But yeah, raised in Toronto, went to school here, and everything else. Yeah.
So is there something special around regulation that people might not understand as to why there's so much activity in Canada in the psychedelic space, and maybe why you chose to set up your business in Canada?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can talk about me. I'll give you sort of my take on why Canada has been such a hotbed, and it really has to do, unfortunately, not with like the regulations, although there is a little bit to that. Like, it's easier to manufacture these molecules in Canada than it is to manufacture in the United States. That is mostly to do with the DEA sets this global quota. So, like, the DEA decides that in the year 2023, researchers will need no more than like 2 kilos of psilocybin, and they set that target in advance, and it applies to everyone in the United States. So like you could be like planning, like this is literally an example that has happened to somebody I know. They had like a lab ready to synthesize, and then the DEA was like, "Oh no, sorry, bro. Like there's only you can only make 200 grams. The rest is all used up." So that's really hard to plan supply chain around that. So in Canada, it doesn't work that way. In Canada, you tell Health Canada we're going to make a kilo, they say yes, and then you make a kilo. So yeah, supply chain I think is easier in Canada, which is why we chose to manufacture here. But the other real reason is honestly, it's our regulatory system vis-a-vis like the financial markets and the legacy of cannabis. I think that's why most companies in this space are registered in Canada, even if they're not based in Canada. But we happen to be.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a lot easier to make a public company. The RTO thing is relatively well, I don't want to say straightforward, doable maybe, and
Doable,
yeah.
doable, and you can bank.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? You like you don't have any issues with like banking or like all the stuff that I think is a little bit challenging in the U.S.
Yeah. Even I've been beat up by the banks down here. It's really crazy. So I don't
Totally,
even make
totally.
drugs. I wish I did, but don't.
Yeah, you just do a
Um,
podcast. Come on.
right. So um, now I think you were really intelligent in choosing MDMA as the primary thing you were going to be manufacturing because obviously MAPS being the longest running nonprofit, like is it necessarily easy for researchers to get this from MAPS? Like I don't know the answer if they're going to do non-MAPS
I mean,
trials. I've heard some people say it's hard.
yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like so first I will say I asked Rick before I like so we really started off as like drug discovery, right? We were just gonna make like better MDMA. We were really like we had a bunch of intel, we had like a thesis, we're gonna go forward and do it. And then we started like, as one does, we started talking to researchers looking for, you know, people to help us do the drug discovery. And what we kept hearing time and time again is like, that's great that you're gonna do this stuff, but like hey, do you have any just like generic MDMA in GMP quality, of course? Like engineering grade is fine. You can find that a lot, but like, do you have any GMP MDMA? And we kept saying, well, no, like go get it from MAPS. And the answer was like, well, they don't have any, or it's very hard to get. And I think there's really really good reasons for that. But probably not for me to say why. But anyway, so like I went to Rick. We did a thing very similar to this actually. And afterwards, like in the green room, I was like, "Hey man, people keep asking me to make MDMA. Can I make some? Are you going to be cool with that?" Um, and frankly, Rick's earned the right to tell us off if he wants. And none of us would be in this industry without him. But of course, that's not who he is. Like he was very gracious, and he was like, "No, no, of course, go forward. Like the more supply there is in the market, the more research gets done, the faster this is going to get approved. Like this is great. Go." So yeah, so we started making it.
That's outstanding. And what's the process like in Canada of establishing a facility where you can legally manufacture this stuff?
So we actually have like a very asset light model. We don't make it in a lab that we own. We use contract manufacturers. There's a couple of reasons why we did that. One is, I mean, to be completely honest with you, setting up a lab, like the startup costs are just murder. Like literally millions of dollars down the drain. And then on top of all that, you have to then, you have to do the process development work. It takes time. The time is money, as they say. And then on top of everything else, then you have like these monthly costs. Like electricity is expensive and heating is expensive because it's Canada. And all of it adds up. Insurance and taxes, property taxes. So we just said it right at the beginning. I was going to build a lab, and my COO Shane Morris, who used to be the chief product officer for Aurora Cannabis, basically sat me down and said, "Nick, you're off your rocker. This is a way too small a company to do this. We're going to contract manufacture. There's lots of pharmaceutical labs. And one of the reasons that we chose MDMA is it is like synthetic only. There, with psilocybin, you can grow mushrooms and extract, but there's no natural source option for MDMA. So we knew that we could sort of do something that other people would have some trouble doing.
It's a good molecule too, in that it's really shelf stable. I'm told psilocybin is really expensive to maintain and keep it stable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's correct.
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
look,
And
if you use synthetic psilocybin, you can and you keep it away from water, so you have to store it with like desiccant and stuff. But yeah, you can definitely you can keep it, but it's the MDMA is like unbelievable, decades, literally decades of stability. It's unreal.
it's extraordinary. I never let mine hang out for that long, but I get why some groups would. Uh, so now, is it like given that you're doing contract manufacturing, did you just have to get certain kinds of permission from the government to be able to make those orders? And like, do you ever get it in your custody, or
Wasn't
is
so
that like
much.
another third party deal?
So yeah, we don't actually physically hold the material. Like we don't even have office space. I'm coming to you from my home. We're like a pandemic company, which means that we are like fully virtual. So we find vendors that are appropriately licensed. That is oftentimes hard. I'll be like very transparent about that. It's super tough to find people who are willing to make MDMA, who are appropriately licensed. A lot of the time you have to find vendors who aren't licensed, and then they make you pay to get their licenses up to the appropriate level, which is fine. That's fair. But yeah, so we do everything through third parties. But it actually, in the long run, I think it works really, really well. The beauty of our sort of asset light model is, let's say tomorrow, like today, we know that Australia is changing, right? One of the things we did while we were in Australia is we met with a whole bunch of like pharmaceutical labs in Australia, and we have all this intellectual property around the manufacture of MDMA. Well, for the Australian market, we're going to make it there. Why would I make it in Toronto and ship it to Australia when I can just make it in Australia, right?
That's really cool, and that avoids a lot of import export BS. Like, I'm sure the paperwork is crazy. I know it's practical and doable in some cases, but if you can avoid it, like, why wouldn't you? Right?
Yeah, it is so much worse than that. Like, it's so stupid.
Oh man,
I
can you give us
really,
an idea? Like, say you
I,
wanted to ship like 2 kilos to South Africa, like in 5 months.
I will
Like,
I will give you an actual example
all
of,
right,
of how
great.
stupid it is. So we a while back we got like the largest export permit of MDMA in Canadian history. 300 grams. It's not that much, but like okay, woo, yay, hurrah. Um, and so like our lab preps everything. There's an import permit from the UK, which is where this is going. There's an export permit from Health Canada, our regulator. We get it all together. We get the box, and we're shipping with a company called World Courier, which in the world of medical supplies is considered like the best shipper out there. Okay, so they're good, full credit, they're good. Um, and then it goes so like the permit is going to expire because all of these have like a best before date, right? Because they're permits, and it's usually not a big window. Like you get 2 months on the import permit, and then you get 1 month on the export permit, and you hope that they like align and you can get it out the door. So we get it to World Courier on a Thursday, but it doesn't go out on the Thursday, and it doesn't go out on the Friday, and it sits there over the weekend. And then on Monday, it's meant to go out, box properly labeled, and then like right before it goes on a plane, somebody takes that box and puts it in another box. And then that box is not properly labeled, so the airline says, "Nope, that's not properly labeled. This is a dangerous good. It's a controlled substance. It's gonna bring, I don't know, it's gonna bring the plane down." Um, so then they send it back to the courier, but now all of our permits have expired, and so now it's another like I think like that was like the last day of February. I think maybe we'll get it out next week. So that's a month lost for no reason other than some dude put a thing in a box.
That's brutal. Yeah, and to like have your
It's
business
so
operating
painful.
with those kind of guidelines, like that's got to be really stressful.
So
On a,
painful.
yeah. Um,
Totally. You should have seen my guys. Just like people were like tearing their hair out.
yeah. no, that's brutal to, think you have it together and it's going to work okay, but it doesn't. Like that's rough.
And it's
Um,
always like, and it's always just like silly human error stuff. Like it's not, this wasn't like, there was nothing wrong with the product. There was nothing wrong with it was just stupid, like silly, guy put a thing in a box. Um, but of course, when you're dealing with highly controlled substances, like that has impact, that has ramifications.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's crazy complicated, and it's too bad. I I hope it gets streamlined as regulations get sorted out and as things we hope get
I mean,
rescheduled at
over
least
time.
stateside, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm sure over time it will get easier. And there'll be just like, at customs, fewer eyebrows raised when somebody ships, MDMA or psilocybin or any of these things. But, I got to be honest, like having worked within government and having lobbied government for a very long time in my career, if you like whatever moves you have to make to remove a step that involves like a government entity, it's probably worth you doing it. Right? So if I can manufacture in Australia, I will. And like wherever they like, let's say for the sake of argument, like South Africa, to use your example, is the next country that's going to change the regulations and allow for the use of these molecules. I'll manufacture in South Africa too, just to get away from this whole import export nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes sense, and most countries have infrastructure to handle that, from what I understand. So
Totally,
why wouldn't you? Yeah,
totally, totally. But I mean, I think that's like this is the part about the industry that nobody ever talks about. Is you know, like I don't know, psychedelics are on the front page of every magazine and newspaper. And, my neighbors talk about psychedelics every day. Like I get peppered with questions when I'm like taking my kids, to the park. So
yeah,
there's like an intense level of interest. But if the public perception of the industry is like up here, then the reality of like the supply chain for the industry is somewhere like 6 feet below ground.
makes sense. Yeah, there's
Does
there's
it
so many
though?
moving parts, right? Like including, and I'm sure you're aware of this. Like, where does insurance come from for the industry? It's a really difficult topic, and people are working on it. I'm hoping to do some good media there, because without insurance, big insurers or big investors won't want to come in. Once we have a lot more of the industry covered, we're in really good shape to have like more people come on board, right?
But like I like even listen, even just on a pure supply chain side, I mean, if you look back at cannabis, it was the opposite problem. Like there was too much. Once that
Yeah,
industry got rolling, they were producing just like, tons and tons and tons of cannabis. And it became sort of arms race. I'm not advocating that for this industry because it ended up going very poorly for the cannabis guys. But like I look around, there's very like because so many of these molecules have a source in plant medicine. I think that there's just belief like, oh, whatever, like we'll just grow some, right? But I also like I want high quality stuff, and also like listen, like running a mushroom grow up is also like a good high quality mushroom grow up is also not easy or cheap or like or any of these things, right? Like it all takes work.
yeah, yeah. If you want to do like a real production lab, it's no joke. You have to take it really seriously. I
Yeah,
think it's cheaper than setting up a chem lab of some kind, but like totally,
yeah,
it's still a lot of work and expense. No way around it. Um,
yeah.
yeah, it's crazy what you can do with just a couple pieces of plastic, but if you want to be doing it at scale, there's like a good amount of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I remember.
at scale, and also like one of the things that we always talk about is what are like I want to think like 10 steps ahead, right? So what are the quality standards going to be like for this? So we make everything we only say to be fair, I don't grow anything, right? We synthesize everything in a lab, but we make everything to GMP because you have to, right? And because it's going to be GMP, for those who don't know, is good manufacturing practice. It's basically like all the stuff that you consume, whether it's food or pharmaceuticals or anything else, is GMP. Um, and like it has to be GMP just as a starting point. But there's certainly a bunch of like bad actors out there who would be very happy to sell you whatever that is grown however.
So I'm really curious about MDMA analogs. I'm sure you've got all sorts of trade secrets in there and whatnot, but like why? Well, I have a clean answer, but like why an improved MDMA molecule? If we want to start there, and then
Why an
all the
improved MDMA
variants.
molecule?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So a whole bunch of reasons, but the biggest one is so MDMA has a whole bunch of safety issues, right? It's got cardiotox issues, it's got neurotox issues. So the cardiotox is actually one of the bigger issues. MAPS in all of their trials has actually excluded people with like previous cardiac history, and if you exclude everyone with previous cardiac history, unfortunately, that kind of means that you're excluding everyone over the age of 65, right? Like, there's nobody over the age of 65 that has no like no circulatory system issues and no cardiac issues, and that's kind of a big population, right? Like, it's not like there's nobody over the age of 65 that doesn't have PTSD. So, like, we look at it in sort of two ways. One is when you're working in controlled substances, you really want to focus in on safety because that's where a lot of people have concerns. Like, I know I'm comfortable with MDMA as a therapy, and I know probably everyone listening to this podcast is going to be super comfortable with it. But like, there's an old there's an old guy down the street who's like, no, that's bad, right? So when you focus on safety, you can fight that perception. Two, it's what regulators want to see, right? Regulators love safety signaling because when you the joke I always make is like, having worked with a lot of regulators in the past, is like, when a drug doesn't work, that's too bad, and when a drug is unsafe, people get fired. So from their perspective, like, it's a much more serious issue. And look, and the third thing is you can just open up new modalities of treatment and new patient populations for existing drugs. So, like, to use that, like the example that I just gave you, if we can open up MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, just for PTSD, this is just like the exact same therapy that MAPS is working on, but we can do it for people over the age of 65 or people with cardiac issues. That's not a small thing, man. Like, that's a huge improvement. So that's the kind of stuff we look for.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Like, the cardiac issue is substantial. And they're at the very least blood pressure raising. And for people that don't
Definitely.
have that under control, that's a big deal.
Totally.
Yeah, there's risk of some sort of arrhythmias, infarction.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't like. Yeah, like, look, I don't want to give the impression that we think that like MDMA is unsafe. In the case of like PTSD for assisted psychotherapy, the way that it's being presented by MAPS, I think it's remarkably safe, right? But like, better is still possible.
Yeah, we should always work towards safety when we can, right? Regardless of how fringe the risks are. Like, I've seen a lot of really aggressive overuse in the underground, and I've just never actually seen anybody have to get hospitalized. But people with cardiac issues, I think, that I'm around probably know to stay away. I can think of one friend in particular who just can't touch amphetamines or any kind of stimulant. So they'll use other things to avoid the cardiac risk, which is good, harm reduction. But yeah, like, even if there's a 1% or like, who knows what it is. I love the line, like, MDMA is safer than riding a horse. I don't know how risky or safe a horse is, but it's safer than that. And a lot of people do it.
I've been kicked by a horse, and yeah, I don't fuck with horses, man.
So, yeah, like, I think there's a lot of room for improvement generally in a lot of these kind of people hate it when we use these terms in the industry, or especially in like the legacy psychedelic community, like Gen 1 molecules. But it's a really useful term, I think, for so many reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and listen, like, we had like the whole idea behind the company was like we wanted to play in both. Like, yes, we want to manufacture Gen 1 molecules, and yes, we want to help like researchers, do the work with these molecules, and we want to improve them. And I think people do get a little upset. Like I've had people sort of come and talk to me and say, you can't tell people that you're working on safety because it lends this impression that like these drugs are unsafe, and so you're doing a bad thing. And I'm like, well, no, I don't agree. Like, that's like saying, we should never talk about seatbelts because cars are already safe. Well, no, like we can still make them better. We can still improve them, right? And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that, just for the sake of the Gen 1 molecules, right?
I come from software, so something like you put out a piece of software and there's obviously issues in it. Are you going to just not update the thing? Like, should Microsoft always be updating to keep us more secure? I think the answer is yes. Same thing with Apple. But, how do we just continue improving performance and safety? And I was hearing, Nick, some discussions on how do we shorten the amount of time required in the therapy room. And, shorter acting drugs might really help reduce costs a bunch and still get some really good effects. Likewise with longer acting. Like we don't actually know what's going to shake out yet, right? We need to have drugs to be able to sort all these scenarios, in my opinion.
Yeah, listen, on the duration stuff, I actually lean less towards like fiddling with the molecule and more towards delivery mechanisms. Like I think that you can get some really like we looked at a bunch of stuff, but one thing we looked at is nasal sprays. So nasal sprays are super interesting because half of the dose basically goes like directly to the brain, then half the dose gets swallowed. So you get both like a delayed release and a fast acting. So I think that there's a ton of work that can still be done. That's one small example.
So more rapid onset, and you're consuming less overall drug, right? Which is
way less drug.
I think
way
pretty
less
big
drug.
win.
Yeah, it's great.
Doctors, I think generally speaking, physicians want to use less and less molecule when possible because it's safer, right? Generally.
Yeah. And as a drug developer, that's cheaper, so that's great too. Less API is
Yeah.
always good.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. I was actually thinking about injectable subcutaneous psychedelics last night. Just wandering the streets of Los Angeles thinking about this, and like I think there's so much room to innovate here, and if we can use less drug, like it makes it theoretically a lot cheaper. If you can swallow something, maybe that's always going to be the cheapest, but these alternate route, well, needles make it more expensive. I think nasal sprays could be relatively cheap.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a bunch of stuff. We were contracted as the exclusive supplier for a company called Revive, and Revive wants to put MDMA into a microneedle patch.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's going to work. I have no idea, but like, we'll supply them. They'll do the preclinical. We'll see if it works, and if it works, great, amazing. There you go. Like I think for this kind of stuff, I love sort of a lot of experimentation. Let's see what works best.
And the opportunity you're also confronting here is that the drug war made it such that there wasn't really all that much science being done in these areas, especially publicly. So there's like a lot of work that we've known for decades we need to do, and now we kind of have the opportunity to do it. So it's got to be really, really interesting. Are you seeing any action? Like we talked about Australia, we think, I keep telling everybody 9 months, but I love July as an answer.
Well, July's the regulations actually change. Like that date has been announced. That's law.
Oh, extraordinary. Yeah. And I think it's going to be really interesting. We'll hopefully have some hand in training folks out there. We're in some talks about that now. And then what about Canada? Are there any interesting MDMA moves in Canada that our American listeners or European listeners might not know about?
Well, I mean, look, we have the special access program. I think it's a little bit slow and clunky. Certainly as compared to like the Australian example, I expect Australia will do sort of better than us. And like I'm also chair of the board of PsyCan, Psychedelics Canada, which is our trade association. So certainly I can say that like we're lobbying pretty aggressively here. Um, I think Canada for a while was sort of the leader in this space. I think special access was probably as good as it got. But I don't mind telling you, we had a couple of meetings with some decision makers in Ottawa in the last month. Even we actually got meetings very quickly, which I'm very grateful for. And like our message, one of the guys sort of started the meeting by saying like, I don't want to be a court of appeal for decisions that have already been made. And I was like, well, that's fine because like here's what's going on in Australia, and you're just like you're not on top anymore. And that's not. I'm not asking you to be a court of appeal. I'm just letting you know the reality of who's the best in class now, and it's not Canada, unfortunately. So I think that we can be, as we talked about, there's so many companies that are based here. We can be better.
Yeah, agreed. So that's really optimistic, and I love hearing that. And the fact that you can get in the room with politicians. What is it, like a 5-hour drive to Ottawa from Toronto, roughly?
Yeah, give or take, or a 40-minute flight. The flights are pretty cheap, and I recommend those.
So, yeah, like it's a practical thing to be able to lobby the government in Canada. It's like it's certainly a bit much in the States. Like had the experience recently, but it sounds a lot more doable in Canada, which is really awesome. And is there anything about Australia being a Commonwealth state and like Canada looking at the relationship differently between Australia and
I think,
Canada?
yeah. Like, look, I don't know. This time when I went to Australia, I've never done business in Australia before. This time when I went to Australia was literally the first time that I'd been there. But I have a lot of friends who spent a lot of time in Australia, and they did say to me in advance, like, listen, tell them that you're Canadian. They'll like that. So I did get a good reception, I think. There's also a bunch of, the TGA, which is the Australian health regulator, and Health Canada. They have sort of mutual recognition of quality standards and drug facility licensing. So it was a fairly easy process for us to say to TGA, like, listen, here is the license for the facility in Canada that manufactured this stuff. We would like to bring it in to have it ready for July 1st. Do you see any issues with that? Um, you know, can we file a drug master file? What makes sense for you? Like all this stuff. And so, we all spoke the same language, which is nice. Um, but I think that would be true in the U.S. and in Europe as well. I think most of the sort of the G8 OECD countries would work this way.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I just think the bureaucracy here in the United States is probably just like cost and time prohibitive. So I think there's going to be some really great innovation outside the U.S., which is wonderful. I feel like the U.S. is missing a lot of opportunities here, so not that wonderful being American, but it's just great that the rest of the world can play here, in my opinion.
I mean, once you get stuff into the United States, I actually don't think it's that bad. It's really the border is super tough. We do we do a bunch of research at the University of Arkansas School for Medical Sciences with a guy named Bill Fantagrossi, Professor Bill Fantagrossi, and Bill's awesome. Bill is like one of these old school rodent researchers who's been doing this since for a long time, and frankly, like punches way above his weight. Is remarkably good at what he does. Not super well known, but like a brilliant guy. And so like once we get it to him, like the U.S. still has some of the best psychedelics researchers in the world, like period, full stop. But the supply chain is kind of a problem. Like I hate to keep coming back to supply chain, but it kind of like it's really the rate limiting step to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. Like how could it not be, right? There's so many I guess one of the issues is that not every lab that wants to be doing this work has the right kind of DEA license and or infrastructure. It's really expensive, from what I understand, to operate these trials, right, and set up the rooms properly and all that. Yeah, and I wonder if it's
talk about
similarly
that.
expensive elsewhere.
I don't know. We've done research in Australia, we've done research in the US, we've done research in Canada. That's about it. So I can't really. Oh, we've helped a bunch of people in the UK, so I have a good idea of the UK. I think the UK is a little bit easier, but talk about that, like the just the regulation of controlled substances. So in addition to safety, one of the other things we look for is this molecule controlled or not? So in our drug discovery work, we actively look for, can we do work with a molecule that's going to have very similar effects to MDMA, but it'll just be like 10 times faster and 30 times cheaper because it hasn't been scheduled yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm sure with the U.S., you'd have to consider the Federal Analogs Act a little bit. Except, in the research capacity, I don't know that the DEA would be as harsh. I think that's more for like novel chemical production and more gray and black markets. But
Yeah,
it could be the
yeah.
case. I don't know.
But still, I mean, Canada also has analogs legislation, and in Canada, it's actually even worse than the US. So, our government has sort of broad powers to designate anything an analog at any given time. They don't have to justify it. I mean, at least DEA has to do hearings about this stuff. Um, Although they haven't always stuck to that rule, but
Right.
I mean,
I
with
think.
MDMA, right? Famously, with MDMA, they just they didn't hold the hearings. They were just like, no, it's done. It's scheduled. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, how do we gain a little bit more trust with those folks? I think it's going to take some time to recover. Because we're not just dealing with like biotech and the DEA, FDA, right? We're dealing with a lot of layers here, you know. So they've regularly performed in bad faith, done some really crazy stuff.
Yes.
I think they haven't responded for multiple years to some of my FOIA requests. So, it's breaking the law. Um, so
Oh
uh,
man,
I don't know that they're afraid to break the
don't bring
law.
up FOIA because no man, FOIA, if you think it's bad in the U.S., in Canada it's like routine for it to take like years and years and years for every accident. A friend of mine just got a FOIA request back. It was like 2 years later, and they answer, instead of answering, they're like, "Hey, do you still even want this?" And he's like, "Yes, yes, I want it. Yes, I want it." He's like an active working journalist. He's very good. Uh, yes, I want it. Give me it's 2 years. Give me my stuff.
That's incredible.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible. Not horrible. It's horrible.
At least we can sue them if they don't follow the laws that they've been
Yes,
held to.
you
Yeah.
can sue. We it's a lot more difficult to sue in Canada.
Mm,
You guys have a much more
interesting.
functioning legal system. America's not the worst at everything, man. Don't believe that for even a heartbeat.
No, I think it occasionally that I'm like, I don't really want to live anywhere else. So um, that's where I land. Um, yeah. So are you are you excited about other indications beyond psychiatric things like PTSD with MDMA and some analogs?
Yeah, and analogs. Yeah, MDMA and friends. Yeah, there's some really good, interesting stuff on Parkinson's. I think a lot of people have seen this video of there's like a former gymnast who had Parkinson's, and has the tardic dyskinesia is the major side effect of taking L-Dopa, um, which is sort of the frontline treatment for Parkinson's. And then he's given some MDMA, and then like the guy's doing backflips. It's unbelievable. But the only issue is it's not a treatment for the disease. It will cover the symptoms of tardic dyskinesia for a brief period of time. Um, so like for the duration of the MDMA's effect, I don't know, 8 hours maybe, right? Um, and so I could definitely see. I have a lot of Parkinson's in my family. My grandma has Parkinson's. My wife's father has Parkinson's. I could definitely see, like the use of a medicine that can completely eliminate your symptoms for a day, even if you can't use it all the time. But a way to like live a normal day once every couple of months, that's got to be good for your mental health, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was just hearing about somebody with some really aggressive chronic pain, and they had to do some really crazy stuff to get even 15 minutes of relief, like ketamine plus psilocybin separately. And for 15 minutes, like that's really shocking, shockingly poor results. But just to have that 15 minutes, like was just such a sigh of relief for
Still,
that person with a chronic condition. And similarly with the Parkinson's
totally.
sufferer, like that's,
Yeah,
yeah, really big deal.
yeah, yeah. I always think about like, you know, obviously my wife and I are already married, so like this is less applicable. But you know, imagine you're a father with Parkinson's, and you have the ability for for your daughter's wedding day to be like fully functional, on the ball, like no body tremors whatsoever. Like, how nice would that be? Um, Now I don't know if that's like a valid. I mean, it's a valid medical use for sure. Symptom relief is a valid medical use. I don't know if anybody would ever like do full on clinical trials for that. It seems like more like an off label use to me, um, but still like I think very powerful stuff. We're also looking at this is a psychiatric indication, but we're looking at doing a clinical trial for social anxiety in an autistic population, for a couple of reasons. One is that's an orphan indication. There are no treatments. Um, every person with autism suffers some level of social anxiety, more or less than. Um, and and the other thing we found out is with one of our analogs, we actually put it into an autism rodent model, and the rodents, they're called BTBR mice. So they're like a generally accepted model for autism, and these mice reacted way better than GenPop mice did to our analog. So we did not expect this. Like, we really stumbled upon it, but we may have developed like an MDMA analog that is better for autistics, which is super cool.
That's fascinating. Um, so I'm in
Yeah.
the city currently where they did a lot of that early research. I think it was Charlie Grove, Alicia Danforth,
Yes.
and a few others at UCLA,
Yes.
right? And that's really great
Yeah.
research. And
We spoke to Charles. We spoke to Charles before we went down this track. Brilliant guy. Alicia's like out of it. Like, she's just like, I'm not interested. Like, she didn't even want to talk. She's like, I'm done with this part of my life. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Which is fine. That's totally up to her. But Charles told us like the effects were super durable. Like, people in that trial who he still sees are like still feel a lot better. Like, years and years and years later.
yeah, that's what we want, right? Durable results, not so many treatments, and hell yeah. I
Totally.
Are you familiar
Totally.
with the Autistic Psychedelic Society? Aaron Orsini
Yeah.
runs this group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're doing some
Yeah.
really cool stuff, and I'm sure, um, yeah, they're definitely curious about this.
Well, once we get our trial up and running, we're hoping before the end of the year we'll get our trial up and running. I spoke to Aaron at Microdose. My plan is to ask him to help me recruit for the study. So
That's
we'll see.
fantastic. I love that, and yeah, his population is just really active and ready to rock, and um, I love it. I love seeing the growth there. I have some autistic family members, so like that's always great to see awesome movement there. Yeah, um, that's cool, and yeah, it's such an interesting um, neurotype. I think is the term I'll use, and like how and what can we learn about the human condition by studying autistic populations? I think like the research is just getting started. Psychedelics are going to give us some really interesting tools to get more data too.
Yeah. Well, like, look, I can tell you that based on the preclinical, it looks like our analog works better in and this is just an autism rodent model. It's not we haven't tried it in autistic human beings yet, but I couldn't for the life of me tell you why, and neither can any of our researchers. Like, there's nothing I know about the structure of the autistic brain that like lends an explanation to this. But as with a lot of this stuff, like it's the first half of the first inning. Like, we have a lot of time yet to sort of suss out these effects, um, and we shouldn't let that get in the way. Like, getting the mechanism of action and everything else nailed down shouldn't stop us from developing treatments in the meantime. Like, if it works, then it works, right? Um,
How do you like to think
my
about
belief.
this?
As long as it's safe.
I see resistance regularly from researchers. Not necessarily. Well, there's one group that thinks like this whole rigorous FDA process isn't good enough. There's another group where like we really need mechanism of action in order to be putting it into practice. Like, how do you like to think about that? Like, I think mechanism of action is so mysterious. We're kind of a long way away from it with most drugs, maybe
Yeah.
at this point.
Well, certainly with any neurological drugs, we're very far away from it. Um, the brain is very complicated, and I'm not a brain scientist, so like I'm definitely useless in this conversation. I can tell you how I think about it. I think about it from a public policy perspective, which is my background, right? And so, um, if you told me that you have a brand new drug that was developed in a lab that nobody has ever seen or tried or tested before, and that's, let's call it drug A. And then you had drug B, which is like derived from a mushroom that people have been consuming regularly for the past 5,000 years, and no one's died. And you're asking me which one is safer? Well, it's the mushroom, man. like it's not even a question, right? Just right on the face of it. I know that might be like very reductionist, but harm reduction has reduction in it. So yeah, I think that we would and we should give preference to the drugs that we know a hell of a lot about, and that includes every drug in sort of this psychedelic universe. We know a lot about it. I actually think that the drugs that we're developing, the new stuff, the analogs, that should have a much higher bar than the sort of the Gen ones, right? Like, we know about the Gen ones.
Yeah, we've got history of use at least.
Totally.
The new ones, yeah, we have to do a lot
history
more
of use,
safety
like,
data.
yeah, like the history of use with like God knows who making them God knows where, with like unknown dosages in nightclubs. So yeah, I think that honestly they're pretty safe. Um, doesn't mean that we can't do better, but like, yeah, from like a drug development perspective, the drug that you know a lot about is always the safest drug. Which is why I think that Australia made the right choice, right? You know, they didn't say like we're legalizing everything. They said, okay, these molecules we see efficacy, we are comfortable on safety, right? We're going to put in controls to make sure that this doesn't like isn't used as a party drug or whatever, and it's actually being used to like treat patients. But you know, they didn't require a whole bunch of clinical trials for psilocybin. MDMA is sort of the MAPS has published the data, but they just did it. I think that's fair and fine and like very much fair play. But like you're going to make me badmouth my customers now a little bit. Like a lot of researchers, I think, look, researchers like to research. Every single paper starts and ends with like more research is needed. So
Yeah, I guess that's the same way a surgeon wants to cut or a carpenter sees a nail everywhere.
totally,
Like, yeah, it's what they
totally.
want to do, and I think yeah we should continue to progress science. It's just at what expense, right? I think we have clear enough data, and I don't who am I to say this, but given the FDA has given both compounds breakthrough status, like that could theoretically save other countries a lot of money in this research and implementation process, right?
Totally.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And like, who are we to like, look, FDA has their process. Great. MAPS is following it. Compass is following it. But like, who are we to judge another country that says like, listen, I don't want to go through the trouble. Like, I have a whole bunch of PTSD patients and they need treatment, and I see this as a viable treatment. Like, let's go. Right. I think that's a very fair approach.
yeah. And I like to go a little further regularly when I talk about this. It's that the how many people has the drug war hurt, including people who weren't able to get access to treatments that could have saved their lives or decreased their suffering radically for over 5 decades of this really aggressive war on drugs, and how unconscionable that is to even support it. And People still do somehow. But we're still kind of fighting that drug war narrative here, and that's why we have to live up to these really high standards so that this stuff can really come out at scale all over the world, right?
Yeah, like, look, I have no problem with standards, right? Like, we base our business off of like quality standards. So, like, it is incredibly important. I just, I also think that we need to ground ourselves in sort of an understanding of, what the world is really like. So, like, when the Australia change happened, this dude on Twitter, like, I was tweeting a lot because we were all very excited. And this dude on Twitter was like, "Do you believe in harm reduction? Like, do you believe in immediately like ending enforcement and descheduling these molecules?" And I was like, "Yeah, yes." Like, wait, you expect me to say no? Of course, yes. That's like table stakes, isn't it?
That's the stuff we love to hear from people working in biotech, manufacture, etc. Like there is an underlying paranoia. I had a podcast ages ago with JR from MindMed, and we got into this. Like, are you going to use company funds to fight legalization and like decriminalization efforts? And it got a little heated for a while. I think eventually he said no, he
Well,
wouldn't.
I mean,
He's not in power anymore, so it doesn't matter that much. But
yeah,
um,
yeah, it doesn't really matter anymore. But like, I mean, there's all this comments about reunion, sort of like the mindset patent dispute is their comeuppance for going to DEA and saying yes, schedule every molecule except for ours, which is a like honestly like if I may, it's a shitty thing to do,
party foul for sure. Yeah, to
big time.
make research more difficult. Like, it's an anti-science position. It's let me
Yes.
defend my castle over be a team player here. Um, Not
So
great.
yeah. I mean, like, look, like we have IP. Like, I'm not, I'm not some sort of wealthy
Yeah.
violet here,
No, and I think
um,
there's a
but I
nuanced
like,
approach to take around IP, right? Like, we don't. It's not
yeah,
all or nothing. Like,
no,
how
I
do you?
mean,
What do you
like,
think like good IP looks like, and what might a bad IP situation look like in your position?
so,
Or
so, so, like, good IP is like you go out, you actually do some research, you invest time and money, you find something genuinely surprising. Like, we did not know that our analog was going to work better in autistic rodents before we did it, and then we did it, and it was great, and we were all very happy and pleased. But we didn't know going in that was going to happen. And like, yes, we included that in our patent filing because, like, of course we did, right? We found out something cool and new. That's I think that's fair, and that's a good patent. A bad patent is like, I'm going to patent that the color taupe, when applied to like in the paint of the room where the therapy is done, improves like therapeutic outcomes. Come on, man! Like,
right.
there's so many of these patents that are just like it's just like machine gun trying to close doors for other people.
Yeah. Anti competition, like an anti competitive approach, I think is a broad category of not in good form. I understand why they want to do it, and when big biotech gets here, it's that's going to be the game they play, right? Genzyme, J&J. Well, J&J is already doing it with esketamine or Spravato. So yeah, I've heard they've actually
But
been
listen,
deploying a bunch of
also
cash
don't
to
forget,
defend it.
yeah. But like, also don't forget that, like, at Pfizer HQ, they probably have like three floors of lawyers whose only job is to like bust through patents, right? So I worry that some of these companies who may not have like the most hardcore patent counsel available, who are doing these machine gun patents just rapid fire, you never know what's going to be important later, and then maybe somebody comes along and just like rips a hole through your entire IP strategy. I've seen it happen. It's not fun when it does. And then, a bunch of investors who are sort of relying on you get hurt as well. So, we try to be thoughtful about our IP and make sure that it's actually sound.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and it's you're right. It's a really hard situation to be in. Like, you have no idea what they could pull off. These three floors of lawyers at Pfizer
Yeah, and they're
HQ.
good. They're good.
I
They're
can
they're,
only
they're the good
imagine.
lawyers.
Yeah, the kind I can absolutely never afford in my life. And yeah, it's
100% respect. Me
fascinating.
neither.
it's fascinating to see like this is their game and this is how they operate, and because it's not necessarily about what's legal and not legal, right? It's how do I make a strategy where I will likely win,
Yes.
that I won't get in too
Yeah.
much
How do I
trouble
tilt the
for.
deck or tilt the table in my favor? But look, this is why I'm so bullish on the trade association. Is we can do that too, right? We can tilt the table in our favor by going to government and like zealously advocating for the industry, and that includes stuff like decrim, right? But like one of the things that we said, last time we came to them, which was in so we met with the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions here in Canada in like November, and we basically said like, listen, we think that you should allow for the use of psilocybin in treatments. Exactly what sort of Australia did, very similar model. Uh, and she said, well, okay, like go do clinical trials and then just prove it, and then we'll approve it as a drug, right? And we said, well, no, like with all due respect, I don't think that it's an off-patent medication. No company in their right mind is going to spend like $200 million doing clinical trials for you. You can do clinical trials. Okay, so like put $50 million towards clinical research over the next 5 years, and then you can get the data and you can improve it. Like you have the power, you have the ability. Don't give the money to us. Give it to the universities. Universities do this all the time. Everything is possible. But so like that also has good knock-on effects, like more research. For those of us who make these molecules, that's more customers. That's a rising tide that lifts all ships, and hopefully it gets us to like a decriminalized, medicalized situation for psilocybin. Right? That's awesome. Um, that kind of stuff can help everybody. We just have to like go forward and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're a Canadian person, or a biotech that has any kind of footprint in Canada, like check it out. So it's Psycan,
Yeah, go to Psycan.
Psycann.
Yeah.
Yeah,
psycan.org, psycan.org.
great domain. Nice. Yeah, and
Thanks.
how do we come together? And because the enemy here isn't like the other psychedelic biotechs. The enemy is it's like the regulatory apparatus worldwide plus biotech that could squash slow progress. You saw what they did with the electric car many decades ago. Like, can big business do this again? I think
Yeah.
the answer is partly yes, partly no, on account of how old some of these molecules are. I think slowing down the higher
Well,
level progress, Gen 2, Gen 3, totally. I wonder about MDMA. I have questions about that.
so I will add one more thing that we need to
Hmm.
fear,
Yeah.
which is I think we need to fear ourselves a little bit. So the industry has like crazy, crazy momentum right now, and it's awesome to see. Like I'm very, very excited all the time. But I worked in another industry prior to this one. I've worked like my entire career has been working in like um, industries that are sort of on the cusp of regulatory approval. So like I worked for Red Bull when energy drinks were new, and before I did this, before I started PharmAla, I was head of corporate affairs for Juul Labs, the vaping company in Canada, which I saw as very much like harm reduction, getting people off of combustible tobacco and into a safer nicotine source. But that industry, like I don't mind admitting, we got like way too big, way too fast, and way too over our skis, and then people got scared, right? Like it wasn't just the government. Like the government doesn't work in a vacuum. Regular people got really afraid, right? And we owe it to ourselves in this industry to sort of like take the population along for the ride, right? This is why I think safety is so important, because if you're working on safety, people like that, people trust that, and that's what get like that. Like that's what happened last time, right? There was the counterculture and the culture won, and we're still paying for it today. So let's bring the culture along.
Yeah. Yeah. And figure out the right way to do that. And I'm with you. Like, I still think it's, radically harm reduction, an unpopular opinion, but it's where I land on it and I always have. So, yeah. And I was actually talking to some regular cannabis smokers the other day saying, maybe once in a while we should just do edibles and or like a really, really pure concentrate instead of smoked flower, just to like give your lungs a break once in a while. And
Still not good. Anytime, listen, like anytime you're combusting shit and putting in your lungs, it's not good. I think we all, at the heart of it, I think we all know that. Let's be real.
there was one
We don't
study.
stand next to campfires breathing in.
Yeah, it's a bad time. I never feel good. Throw on 4 cigars and I'm in big trouble. But really, there was one study I recall, a cannabis doc presenting. And, it showed cannabis smokers actually had lower lung cancer rates than non-smokers, which I found was like really counterintuitive, but a fascinating thing. I would love to dig into that study 10 years later, 20 years later. But
I saw that too. I don't know if I believe it. Like the so nicotine is not a carcinogen, but nicotine is a promoter of cancer. So if a cancer forms due to all the other stuff, formaldehyde and like all this terrible shit that's in the tobacco smoke, then the nicotine will help it to grow. I don't know. Maybe there's something in THC or THC, CBD, terpenes. I don't know, something that is like a tumor reducer and helps your body fight the tumor. I don't know, but I still don't think it's a good idea. Like, just don't breathe burning things. Like, please, for God's sake.
I just eat edibles, guys.
Yeah,
I can't screw around my lungs. Yeah.
Cool. There's a great product that's available here in Canada that is not available in the US yet. It's a sublingual spray from a company called Feather. Really cool. Really, really cool.
Cannabis?
It's yeah. It's based off of the same technology as like the inhaler, like if you had asthma, like the boot inhaler. So it's like that. So it's just like a very fine mist. You spray it under your tongue. It's awesome. Very cool.
I saw an Israeli biotech doing this recently, really measured doses in an inhaler type device too, which is really fascinating. And I actually think that's a really interesting drug development, drug delivery platform generally. Nebulizers we know are a big deal, but like a portable, if we want to consider a spray like that, a portable nebulizer.
It is meter dose. Yeah, meter dose is like super important, right? You know exactly how much you're getting with every single spray. The reason I know about these guys is we talked to them about like putting psychedelic molecules into their platform, but I don't know if it's the right sort of thing.
But yeah,
but the cannabis one works great.
I'll try to check it out next time in Toronto. Cool, man. So I guess let's try to wrap here. Where can people learn more about PsyCan and also PharmAla?
So PsyCan, www.psycan.org. That's PSYCAN. For PharmAla, we are traded on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the best ticker symbol in the industry, MDMA. And we're at www.pharmala.ca. That's PHARMALA. And I'm Nick Kadysh. I'm the founding CEO. Thanks for listening.
Nick Kadysh, thank you so much for being here. I learned a ton. I hope everybody else learned a ton, and hope we can do it again in the future.
Yeah, when you're in Toronto, let me know. We'll go for a drink.
Absolutely. All right, until next time.